Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of the Understanding Class series. We are back after a long 10-month hiatus. We have a quorum ready, raring to go this summer to get some more chapters done. So today we have a pretty full panel. Let's introduce them one by two. First, we have all the way from somewhere in California, Victoria. How's it going, Victoria?
I have to unmute myself. I forgot how podcasting works. It's doing pretty good. I'm still out here in California. Eventually, I'm going to not be, and that's going to be great. But yeah, for the time being, I am Victoria Magna, aka the Great Victoria.
And where are you not going? Where are you going to be that you're not going to be in California?
Somewhere outside Boston.
Okay. Undefined. The rest of the world, the rest of the planet. Okay, moving on. We have all the way from Canada. We have Kyle, who has returned from the Netherlands. Kyle, how's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. I am back in Canada and ready to talk about this ridiculous theory.
Yeah. When you say ridiculous theory, which one are you talking about?
Well, primarily Sorenson's, but we'll talk about Wright's. Yeah, I feel like Sorenson's is so ridiculous that it beggars belief.
It hurts my eyes. I was walking around the other day, actually, just where we were talking about that one of the docks in London, like, was the biggest dock in the world or something at the time. And I was walking around and my kid was doing some water sports on the dock. Nowadays, it's all just apartments around it. And I was walking around reading this chapter and like finding myself want to spit on the ground every 5 minutes. So I had exactly the same kind of reaction. Okay, now, and last but not least, we have all the way from the mangroves of Arizona, Sophia and Esri.
Oh, hello there.
What the fuck is a mangrove?
It's some kind of like very like temperate like rainforest or something.
No,
like, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, mangroves are kind of
forests and rivers, forest on the sea.
Yeah. Lots of moisture, lots of water.
Oh yeah,
trees that grow like in the water, and their roots, yeah.
That's really cool. It's a really cool ecology, actually.
It's trying to stay above water out here, Like,
yeah. Well, I heard actually, due to, eventually because of climate change, Arizona might be one of the few long term might be one of the few temperate areas.
It's strange because the main account I've heard goes something like,
"We're gonna all die."
See you in Arizona Bay.
Yeah, that might be part of it. Once California sinks,
it will be moist.
It will be moist.
Well, if you want to get depressed about climate change, Ireland apparently is going to get even wetter. It's going to rain more.
I don't know about that in terms of Arizona, because the pawpaw is going locally extinct out there, specifically because it's just getting hotter and drier.
Yeah.
Wait, what's getting extinct?
The pawpaw tree.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a tree with lots of dogs that grow out of it.
No, shut up, Tom.
Oh yeah,
tree. Yeah, I love that tree.
We call them pupper bushes out here, but yeah.
Talking about. Yeah.
Damn it.
Got your regular pupper bush over there.
Yeah.
Just spits and spittoon.
I reckon.
Yeah.
No, it's a native. It's a fruit tree native to North America. Really, really tasty fruit, actually.
Is it native to the area?
Yeah.
Because there's very little remaining indigenous flora because it was all displaced by palm trees and shit that people planted here.
Yeah, that's the other reason why it's going locally extinct. But yeah, it's native to the region.
I thought that in Arizona the only kind of fauna you had was tumbleweed. Am I wrong?
Tumbleweeds aren't even native to North America.
Cacti, baby.
Joshua Trees.
Do you know what I did?
Saguaro.
Do you know what I
Other
actually
kinds of
did see when I was in Arizona? What I actually did see was a roadrunner, and it ran out in the road in front of us, and it stopped like in the cartoon.
Oh
It
my
turned to
God.
us, and then
Did he-
fucking legged it. I couldn't. I didn't even know it was a real bird. We were like, I thought it was a cartoon character.
Well, well,
Yeah.
Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, it's all shot. It was all shot here. You
Yeah.
know, like if you go
Oh,
down,
it's
It's
where-
a live
You can see
action
the drum set. You can see where
Yeah.
they painted, where the coyote painted the fake tunnel on the
Oh,
rock.
yeah, it's a big tourist attraction.
Yeah.
Wow. Have you seen a roadrunner?
Yeah.
I have not.
Yeah. Very
I
good.
have.
Seriously, we were just gobsmacked. Like, we did not know that it was an actual animal. We just thought it was a made-up character for a cartoon. We were like, what the fuck? We were just like,
As a,
what the fuck is this thing?
No, they're very
as
pretty.
a, yeah, as a
Good
child, I was like extremely disappointed that I lived down there in the Southwest for like 4 months and never saw Roadrunner.
Oh.
It was.
I don't think
Yeah, you have to kind of go out in the sticks to see them.
But the thing is,
I
as well,
did
is
go out in the sticks, and I still didn't see one.
but they're smaller
Yeah.
than you expect.
I've
That's
only
the
seen
thing.
them a couple times.
They're smaller than you expect. I thought they'd be
Yeah.
taller. Like, they're only like a foot tall or something like that.
Oh yeah, they're not very
they're
big
pretty
at all.
I thought they were going to be like peacock sized or something, you know, something like that, or goose sized. But no, they're kind of small. Yeah.
No, but in fairness, to the animators, the Roadrunner and the Coyote are roughly proportionately sized
Right.
on that show.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. To be fair to
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
And the coyote is bipedal on that
But-
show. Just
But wait a second now.
I don't-
Coyotes
I
are
don't-
bipedal.
We need to be fair to them because it's just documentary
A
footage.
documentary. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What are you talking
All
about?
they did is get the correct perspective. I mean,
Thank you.
It's not a documentary. It was filmed. Like, I've met Wile E. Coyote. He's pretty chill. He's like he hangs out with Alice Cooper a lot.
oh yeah.
Well, I mean,
Alice-
it's only
wasn't he the governor for a while down there?
We don't like to talk about that. He was very unpopular.
really?
Yeah,
Wait,
he was more conservative than we thought he'd be.
No way. Alice, so I had no idea Alice Cooper was governor.
No,
Uh,
Wile E. Coyote.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
Alice Cooper's too nice. He's too much of a grill dad to run for office.
That does kind of make sense. Oh, was that under the Coyote administration where they instituted the formal ban on trans procedures via public health care?
Jan Brewer. You're thinking
Oh,
Jan
I'm sorry.
Brewer.
I always
Yeah.
get them mixed up.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Common mistake.
Common.
Anyway.
Okay. I don't know what I started there with the Roadrunner, but let's.
Welcome to Arizona Cast, where we
No,
talk about.
listen. This is the classic from Alpha to Omega strategy. You know, we get on about like 10 minutes after we say that we're going to start.
10,
Chat
half
about-
an hour, talk shit for quarter of an hour, and then we get going. That's our.
Yeah.
That's the way we roll. What I'm always amazed is that everybody always goes, "Are you not starting yet?" Every week, no, and all the listeners. Although today there's only 3, people didn't probably even believe it would start, but we still had. I think we had more people like on time than we do now listening.
Yeah.
Okay, let me give a little run through for everybody on where we left off last time, which is 10 months ago. So it's been a long time. So we're doing chapter 4, which is class exploitation and economic rents, reflections on Sorensen's towards a sounder basis for class analysis. So this Sorenson guy had an idea, a just wild idea. Instead of using like exploitation as a tool to explain class society, that he would use rents. And when he did use rents instead of exploitation, he ended up with some rather crazy outcomes based upon that. Some of the like
Tom, hang on a sec, Tom.
yeah.
'Cause he didn't get rid of the concept of exploitation. He got rid of the concept of labor value, labor-based value, and
Well,
and
it's complicated.
because
It's
he
complicated, right?
conceptualizes exploitation as being something that is derived from rent. He doesn't.
Yeah.
He's still talking about exploitation, but in a completely different framework.
It's because neoclassicals, when they did away with labor theory of value, they considered the category of exploitation completely done with. Who gives a shit? And then they're like, you know what? Actually, it'd be funny just to fuck with these Marxists, right? We'll use exploitation in a new way. We'll take this word and repurpose it so that, low rent workers, low skill workers getting solidarity wages from industrial unionism, they're exploiters now. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
The new Coke of class theory we got here.
Well,
no one likes it, but it's around for some reason.
Listen, us moderns, we love the new. The new is better. Like, so if something's newer, that's how gooder it is.
Crystal Pepsi, more like crystal exploitation. Give me that meth and give me that solidarity wage. I'm exploiting you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, so I was imprecise there. Thanks for that, Kyle. So, like, there is a list of all these kind of wacky implications by doing what he did, by making that turn. One of them is like that, the low-paid people that are in a union are exploiting the unemployed. Lots of these things, where basically union workers are exploiting like the unemployed. Lots of where a strong welfare state also increases exploitation. Welfare recipients are an exploiting class. There's just so many bizarre things that come out of this. Now, Wright then is going to come at this not from trying to explain things everything via rent, but he's going to come up with an alternative definition of exploitation, which we're going to do now. Does anybody have anything to say that I've missed out in that roundup?
Just the most important counterintuitive he comes up with, which is that as inequality increases in the neoliberal era, exploitation decreases, and therefore maybe exploitation is actually good for people. Nice. So it's like the third level, like, mind bender bullshit ideology turn is exploitation is based on rent. As inequality increases, exploitation goes down. Therefore, exploitation is actually good.
Right. And
can someone explain this to me? Because I tried to wrap my head around it, and like, even assuming neoliberal bullshit, I'm just like, how?
Because
because
arguably, arguably, like, the solidarity wage is like a good thing, even if you consider it exploitative. I don't know if you have like left-wing political intuition.
Oh, okay, duh.
Then allowing the classless society where everyone gets the proper amount for their rent in the Sorenson definition is actually like a more miserable and it's like a more miserable world, and it's like more harmful. And so exploitation, as facilitated by the state, actually that prevents a classless society. That's more humane and good.
Yeah, you can get a real sort of like Krugman politics out of this shit.
Yeah. So I mean,
it's actually better. It's better for the skilled worker if I'm like working in my. It's better for the nurse when I'm working in the hospital as a scheduler if I get shit wages because I'm not part of their union. Otherwise, I'd be exploiting them.
If you're making anything over what you would get under perfect competition, then you are an exploiter because you are collecting a rent in the neoclassical framework. And so, yeah, if you are making anything other than just what the going market rate would be, assuming neoclassical perfect competition exists in the background as a possibility, you are an exploiter. So yeah, if you're not in absolute poverty, exploiter.
Holy fuck! I think I like being an exploiter now.
Well, you're just in this privileged position as getting these rents for assets you don't have. I mean,
that's right, because we all know
the real class elite.
We all know there's perfect information and perfect competition in markets in the real world. It's just this stuff just fucking makes me want to scream. Let's let's hit into Wright's alternative definition of exploitation. Who wants to take this one? Vicky, do you want to try this one?
Sure. So we have the alternate definition as put forward by Wright. Number one is the inverse interdependent welfare principle, which basically means that the material welfare of the exploiters causally depends on the reduction of material welfare of the exploited. Number two, the exclusion principle. This inverse interdependence of welfares of exploiters and exploited depends upon the exclusion of the exploited from access to certain productive resources. And number three, the appropriation principle. Exclusion generates material advantage to exploiters because it enables them to appropriate the labor effect of the exploited. So on number one, basically the material welfare of the exploiter is causally dependent on the reduction of material. It's basically number one. Basically, what he's saying is that in order to be an exploiter, you have to be essentially taking away something materially from somebody else, right?
Yeah, like a zero sum kind of a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And then we have like the exclusion principle, which like some people like, so the proletariat say are excluded from the resources, access to certain productive resources. And then the final one is the appropriation principle. So exclusion generates material advantage to exploiters because this enables them to appropriate the effort of the exploited. So this is like, the workers in the proletariat don't have access to the productive resources. So when they work for the capitalist is able to appropriate some of their labor due to their lack of access. Okay.
Right. While the first one talks about like the game, the second one is sort of the determinant of the rules of the game.
Right. Okay. Now.
Well, we get into the third one.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Did we not say the third one? The appropriation.
No, we did.
No, we did. But fuck. All right.
Yeah. Go on. No. Yeah. Go on. Say the thing you're going to say.
We'll get into the details of the third
Yeah.
one. Slide,
Yeah. We'll be talking quite a bit about the appropriation principle soon.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just thought you had a nice.
I suppose I do have a nice pithy thing about this, and that I'll defend Wright on these terms, and that when John Romer did the analytical Marxist like economic thing, at first he had the same reaction to exploitation. Fuck it, this isn't a meaningful category. But then he tries to use it again, and he redefines it not in as crude and awful a way as Sorenson, but what he does is that he recreates part of neoclassical economics in that, like that kind of exploitation, capitalist exploitation, even though there is exploitation going on, it's not zero sum in the same way. And what I love about Erical and Wright's sociological exploitation is that it restores the zero sum property of Marxian economics. There's that famous passage in Capital when Marx is talking about, oh, look how fair like exchange looks, but what happens when we leave the realm of private property and Bentham and all this and exchange? What happens when we go into production? We see the zero sum heart of capital. Wright's version of exploitation restores the zero sum game in class politics.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let me take this bit then. So this is Wright's alternative definition of exploitation. So Wright does not think that rents provide a full account of the explanatory mechanisms of exploitation. Wow, amazing. My God. Do you know what really has annoyed me about like rereading this chapter was like the way that like you can just like you can say, okay, well, let's not deal with like actual existing reality when we're trying to understand reality, and let's just describe like what the relationship is in production of an owning class and an exploited class, and let's just say, oh, it's a rent, as if the workers are renting the means of production. Like it's incredibly annoying to call this.
What, you're not a big fan of perfectly spherical, frictionless economies in a vacuum?
Well, when you put it like that,
Sounds so nice. Yeah, but it's
well lubricated economy.
It's a common trait to neoclassicals to do that and treat like labor and capital as just different types of assets or whatever. And you know how much I love nice rationalistic pure form ball stuff, but it's an abuse of that stuff to try to apply it outside of where it makes sense. And like
it's not just common; it's necessary. It's
right.
necessary. To the neoclassical framework.
It's like taking what is taking a correct thing that exists, like a rent, okay, or interest, and it applies it to a different type of relation. Knowingly does. That's I just find that that it just descends into just complete non-science, so it just drives me mental reading it. Okay, let's go on. I'm going to stop giving out here. Okay, second point. He thinks that capitalism generates antagonistic class interests, even in the imaginary conditions of perfect competition. Okay, that's a good point. If the first two of these principles are present, so that's the inverse interdependent welfare principle, so your zero sum, and your exclusion principle, where you basically exclude people from the means production, but not the third, which is the appropriation principle. So you don't have this continuous relationship whereby you're appropriating their surplus labor, say, from a Marxist point of view. What might be termed non-exploitative economic oppression may exist, but not exploitation. The crucial difference is that non-exploitation economic oppression, the advantage social category, does not itself need the excluded category. So this is an example in the book they give us of the Native Americans, excluded but not exploited. And I think this is a really, really, really important thing. Like, you can see in the history of the different colonies, different things happening. You see in, America, where there was a large amount of immigration there from Western Europe and Russia and places, that they did not need the Native Americans, and they basically, there was a genocide. You see the same thing happens in I think in Australia, New Zealand, or but in Africa it's a very, very different thing, and so I think this is a very important point, and I think Wright has very eloquently got these principles expressed, and I think they're correct. Okay, anybody have anything else to say there?
When I was reading this and I read Sorenson's kind of account and sort of straw man of Wright, where quoting Sorenson, it says, thus when the European settlers displaced Native Americans, they did not exploit by obtaining an advantage at the expense of Native Americans. They engaged in non-exploitative oppression. I read that and I was like, wow, this is, what the fuck? Like, I'm pretty sure Native America, just like my knee-jerk kind of reaction was like, I'm pretty sure there was some kind of exploitation going on. And then you keep on reading and you get to Wright's response, and it's so damning, like where he says on the next page,
the only good Indian is a dead Indian.
Yeah. He says, but the dynamics of the antagonism are fundamentally different in two cases. In North America, because the settler population didn't need Native Americans, they could adopt a strategy of genocide as a way of responding to the conflicts generated by the exclusion of indigenous people from the land. There is a morally abhorrent folk expression in U.S. culture that reflects this quality of antagonism. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. And this is where the difference is important. No comparable expression exists for workers, slaves, or other exploited classes. One might say the only good slave is a docile slave. One might say the only good worker is an obedient worker. But it would make no sense to say the only good worker is a dead worker, or the only good slave is a dead slave. Why? Because the prosperity of the slave-owning and capitalist depends depend upon the expenditure of effort of those whom they exploit. So, wow.
Yeah, it's
like-
just look at reality, look at history. These are obvious dynamics that have existed. You cannot brush this under the rug.
I think there's a way that people read exploitation theory, and this is maybe true in the rhetoric of Marxists, where, look, there's all kinds of bad oppression out there, but the real evil is exploitation. Certainly you see this in like feminists, like, you know, Marxist feminism, where like, you know, a lot of this, like a lot of people just sort of deny that, you know, unequal exchange of labor when it's not at the point, like the wage form is exploitation. So a lot of people just don't think of, you know, women who do all the housework as exploited in some way. And so like the way that that tends to pan out is that, yeah, exploitation is the prime evil. And then there's all these other oppressions. But this is actually saying, you know, this is like a fairly different point. And I recently, or somewhat recently, ran into someone on Twitter being like, Eric Olin Wright, you know, he doesn't think jail guards exploit prisoners. Like, that's fucked up, you know? Like, I can't believe he doesn't think that.
Yeah, the owners of the prison exploit the prisoners when the prisoners work for them at near sweat
wages.
Yeah, sweat wages.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Like-
the owner of the prison exploits the prison guard.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
argument,
and
that
it's a productive labor argument, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the other thing that I thought was a little bit interesting about the way that this alternative definition sort of frames it, is that it brings the managers into the class of the exploited as well, whose labor is used in the process of actually generating value. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that.
Wright has a lot to say about managers, but this is such a zoomed out, broad, big picture, like fundamental basis of the economy question that, you know, you really have to zoom in to see those details. And I think that we talked about his overall framework already. I'm not sure how much we're going to get, and we are going to get into management a little later. And there's a chapter 6 is very important for that.
Well, to chew on this though, like I think to my job where I schedule for an OBGYN while trans women scheduling for OBGYN. Anyway, we have like whole teams of people. Like we have our normal supervisors, and we have whole teams of people that like basically monitor compliance to when I'm supposed to be on break and when I'm supposed to be on call, basically ready to take calls to schedule and things like that. So, and then later in this chapter, Wright's talking about how they, how like managers are part of this surveillance apparatus to keep workers working efficiently, to make sure they're not shirking. And that's exactly how it works in my job. Now, are they exploited? Exploited has such a moral connotation for the same reasons that like I had this knee-jerk reaction reading Sorenson's kind of straw man of Wright, being like, well, what the fuck, right? Like, that's not exploitation. Well, you know, no, but there are things worse than exploitation, right? There's relative privileges one exploited person might have over another, but at the end of the day, you could make the, I don't even know how much I agree with this, but you could make the case that someone whose job it is to surveil workers who are getting exploited and make sure that they're not shirking are also exploited because they're not reaping that surplus value, or however you want to phrase it in Wright's framework.
Yeah.
They're just
they're a
making
cost.
sure.
They're a cost to the firm.
That's sort of an expansive read on a productive labor that many Marxists give. I think the traditional interpretation is that there's sort of like a form of guard labor to ensure that the labor extraction effort happens, like the prison guard,
Right.
or something. Right. But depending on what type of management it is, they might also be involved in classically productive activities. Not that those distinctions right here matter super much, but just
sure. This is a little bit in the weeds, but yeah.
Like, it's very interesting, this, like, because I read this. There's a kind of a Irish journalist, historian guy called Tim Pat Coogan, who wrote a book on the Irish famine, and it was interesting because at the time he was like unearthing all these documents about from like the the ministries at the time, the prime minister and all that in England, and he was able to lay out all the case where they wanted to actually to depopulate most of Ireland so that they could have turn it more into a ranching kind of a place for like large cattle ranching. And you see like where the population was, like, he makes a case that it was like a genocide. He says, look, the case was like there was excess population there. Why don't we just have cattle there and let's just fucking let them all die? And it's interesting, like, because it really fits like his thesis. Whether it's correct or not, I think it's probably pretty good, to be honest. Like, it really fits into this. It really hit me when I read this. I was like, oh, like where there's excess, like, people, and they don't care about them, they're not bringing them into the mode of production of capital, let's just fucking get rid of them. It's very insightful.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's just
efficiency.
It's a key insight of Marx, and it's a key, it's worth repeating.
Yeah. White genocide, eh? Who thought we'd get that?
Hey!
Yeah.
Well, it's because they're not useful anymore. I don't know. Like, listen, we're going to wish an analytical Marxist post-left into existence so if we're not careful. So I'm just kidding. What's that guy's name? What's that guy? That Chibber already exists. So anyway, fuck.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. Wow.
Let's move it on. Okay, who wants to take this one? Esri, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, sounds great. Exploitation depends on the appropriation of labor effort, a social relation that constantly pits the interest of one group against another that requires their ongoing interactions. It confers upon the exploited group a real form of power with which to challenge the interests of exploiters. Exploitation depends on the appropriation of labor effort. Workers always retain significant levels of real control over their expenditure of effort. The extraction, should I just keep? It's been a while.
If you want to stop, just to make a comment on any of them as you're going along.
Yeah, because I think the first parts, the first parts are dealing just with the the sociological heart of the proposal and the principle.
Right, yeah, like, so this is like, so we should probably say, maybe I'll edit it back in, but this is like Wright's attempt at defining exploitation here. So this is not saying, this is him not saying this is what Marx said. This is him saying this is how I think exploitation operates.
Yeah, and I really do think this is the heart of the Marxian like sociological economic research program, but right there in a sense, like that Wright gets it down to its core, and it's in an obviously sociological way. It's not straightforwardly like economic theory as we know it. It's like a situating, like this is an economic concept, of course, but it's the social situation of this economic concept.
Right, it's like the social logic of it.
Yeah. So moving on, Vicky, did you have something to say?
No, I can wait until we get to the end.
Sure. So yeah, let's see, the third thing that I read was this: workers always retain significant levels of real control over their expenditure of effort. The extraction of effort within exploitative relations is always, to a greater or lesser extent, problematic and precarious, requiring active institutional devices for its reproduction. Some such devices can become quite costly to exploiters in the form of supervision, surveillance, sanctions, etc. The ability to, and so we might like quibble with some of the phrasing or whatever, because are they always able to resist? But I think that the point is that, you know, given in general as a category, given like just the abstract agency, abstracted from maybe the real historical situation that they might find themselves in, that, you know, they could exert their labor effort.
Well, I think this is in contrast to non-exploited economic oppressed, right? Like, if their program against you is basically extermination, right? Like, the only way you can resist is through warfare. Whereas if you're exploited, you don't have to resort to outright violence. You can unionize. You can try to shirk as much as possible, which is what I do. You could, you have more options other than just like fighting them to the death, basically.
Yeah. And this,
yeah, it's also like you said, Esri, that this is a sociological analysis. And so, you know, unlike, say, the bare economic facts of the relation, we have to like take into account, in any given situation, the historical investment that the exploiters have put into restricting the power of the exploited. So the state, you know, like all of the surveillance apparatuses they use, the management techniques, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, instead of just considering it as like a situation outside of time where you have like this power to resist versus the power to exploit.
Yeah. But, you know, the point is
which is just to say that, like, in any given situation, it might seem like the exploited are powerless to resist this stuff. But there's a whole broad array of exploitative structures that have been set up around that to make that
possible. Yeah,
right.
Like that cost exists. You know, like, and I read some paper a few years ago, and it was trying to estimate what this, you know, the cost of supervision and surveillance and security was in America, and they estimated at being 25% of GDP.
Yeah. I mean, a significant proportion of the economy is just basically guard labor. But I think the framing here is interesting because it makes it a little bit more sort of explicit, right? Because the form of power that is available to the exploited, even if exercising that power is potentially more negatively consequential than not exercising that power, lies in the fundamental fact that there is no material advantage to the exploiter without the participation, coerced or freely given, of the exploited. So in order for that system to continue, like you said, you have to have all these systems of control, of dominance, of propaganda, these kinds of things, in order to convince people not to exercise their power, to withdraw that labor. And that is both a significant source of power and an incredible cost on the exploiters as well.
Yeah, so the ability to impose such costs. I'm going to just continue reading because the conversation that we're having already just is going to go into it. The ability to impose such costs constitutes a form of power among the exploited. Thus, a concept of exploitation based solely on the notion of rent misses the ways in which exploiters are not merely advantaged because of the disadvantages of the exploited, but are dependent upon the exploited. And I mean, furthermore, what are these costs associated with, you know, managing and doing guard labor and such? Sometimes these are rents. And so you can situate like, or you could describe these in terms of rents, right? So you can actually situate exploitation and rent in a way that emerges out of exploitation without just jamming them together.
Donald in the chat says that, hello, Donald, those exploitation systems are kind of like evil cybernetics. You can't have perfect exploitation, but there are nested loops of institutional coercion to get as close as possible. Probably.
Yeah, that's right. It's a feedback system that like attenuates out the power of the exploited. Yeah.
Well, I could tell you what, no matter how much they spend, they can't keep me from playing Switch between calls.
Oh, yeah.
I used to, when I worked in Ericsson's, they used to have like disabled toilets, and they were very clean. No one would ever go into them, but they were really good for hangovers, and no one would ever go in. So I used to go up, and they were quite large, and I would go up and I would lie down when I was very hungover, and I would sleep for a few hours, and no one could ever find out where I was. It was really good. Yeah.
Nice.
There you go. That's my one. Okay, next. Class exploitation and perfect competition and information. Kyle, is your voice, is it up to reading, or do you want to?
Yeah, I can do one.
Yeah.
All right. So to test Sorenson's claim that capitalism with perfect competition would be a classless society, we need to examine the 3 criteria for exploitation. We do this in a capitalist society with perfect information, with only 2 categories of economic actors, capitalists and workers. For simplicity, we assume capitalists are pure rentiers, i.e., they do not work. Is the material welfare principle and the exclusion principle satisfied in this case? The first test is, would workers be better off and capitalists worse off if property rights were redistributed so that workers would no longer be excluded from capital? So in other words, you could... okay. So in this system, there is perfect competition, as in there are no transaction costs, and there's perfect information. But some people are classed as capitalists who are pure rentiers. They own assets but do not work. And others have their work as an asset, is, I believe, the implication of what he's saying here.
Yeah.
Now, if we were to change the property rights so that workers are, quote unquote, no longer excluded from capital, that is, they are capable of being rentiers to some extent.
Right. Yeah. So it distributes the rentier element equally amongst the population.
Right. Okay. Yes. God, I hate neoclassical economics so much. This is so nonsense. All right. It's hard to argue that the workers would not be better off if they were also rentiers to some extent. Capitalists have a choice of either consuming their capital or investing it, as well as the choice of whether or not they will work for earnings. Workers only have the latter choice. So capitalists can choose to consume capital or invest it, or they could work. They could use their labor as a asset that would give them an income stream. And workers can only get an income stream from their labor as an asset. Workers could borrow capital, but they would be better off if they didn't have to. And in a world of perfect information, they would not need collateral, since there would be no transaction costs, monitoring costs, or no possibility of opportunism. In other words, the payoff schedule for a loan would be perfectly transparent because everything is known perfectly into the future. And so the lender never has to worry about default because what happens is exactly predictable in a world of perfect information. So if we just define away all of the dynamics of lending, then yes, we end up with this outcome. This shows that if these assets do not generate rents, it is still true. It is still true that non-owners would be better off if the income-producing asset was redistributed. So,
wow, shucks, who could have thought?
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what he's saying is assume that there are things in this world that the capitalists own that are not simply income flows from rents, but are assets. And if the workers were to have the assets, which were acquired through rents, but are not themselves simply rent income streams, the workers would be better off. Which is, self-evident, but okay, sure.
This example is so funny to me because it's like Sorenson is like ANCAP, and then in this specific example, Wright is kind of like left-wing market anarchism as like a counter to Sorenson's anti-capitalism. Like, Sorenson's like, oh yeah, like classless, stateless society through markets, pretty cool. And Wright's like, yeah, but what if like we just redistributed and everybody was petite bourgeois? That'd be pretty cool too,
This is just for a little context. This is all pulled from John Romer's General Theory of Exploitation in class. And
so he's the one we can blame.
He's the one we can blame for this example. But the point of this is to establish a Marxist-like theory of exploitation that is an imminent critique of neoclassical economics. And because it's in such simple terms, I don't know, like when I was growing up and I tried to think about exploitation in rational choice terms, the obvious thing would be like, well, yeah, would everyone be better off if this kind of property didn't exist? Romer in that book uses that framework to argue that, okay, this is a swamp side art. I got some swamp side thoughts here, some big bong rips about...
Everyone bust out the bong.
Bongs are out. Bongs ahoy.
Bongs out. If
Bubble,
you remember,
bubble, toil in trouble.
Rudolf Barrow's The Alternative in Eastern Europe, where he posits that historical progress is elimination of different forms of exploitation. Romer essentially recreates the same logic and tries to found a version of historical materials in that way. So
okay, but this is the thing I don't understand about this example.
Mm-hmm.
How in the fuck do you end up with a society of pure rentiers in a world of perfect competition? How is that sustained?
So I think in this specific example, everyone is kind of both everyone is a little exploited and also a little bit of an exploiter.
No. I think Kyle, it's literally just these are the initial conditions we have. X amount of rentiers, Y amount of workers, and we start from there.
Okay, the thing that annoys me so much about this is I have to keep remembering that time is meaningless to neoclassical economics. Because I think to myself, okay, if this is the system you set up, you run this for like any length of time at all, and the pure rentiers cease to exist. Like, it is not possible to sustain that relationship under perfect competition, assuming the existence of time. But neoclassical economics does not assume the existence of time. So I hate the way that they make these normative claims based on perfect competition, but then also run these kinds of preposterous thought experiments that are possible. Like, they violate the normative claims about perfect competition, and that is possible because you can set initial conditions and examine them in a timeless system.
Yeah. And there's one other thing here as well, is like where they talk about the workers could borrow capital. Okay, and if there's perfect information and everything like that, that would imply, I'm not even sure if it would imply there is even an interest rate, right? You know,
well, no, because you can't have an interest rate if you're not generating rents.
You receive, like, if you were a lender lending out an asset, you would receive exactly nothing. Yes. There's no gains. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because
Right,
this
so
entire
literally-
this entire thought experiment is so goddamn nonsense, because in order to set the initial conditions for the thought experiment and to like make it be an imminent critique of neoliberalism, you have to be so lost in the goddamn sauce. Like
Neoclassical economics. But
yeah.
So yeah, like I think the reason that this is here is to argue that from the rules of the capitalist game, there's clearly something like antagonistic class interests that pop up even from neoclassical assumptions. I think the second reason this is here is because implicitly we're dealing with Romer's definition of exploitation. Wright disagrees with Romer, and he didn't always. Wright adds the labor appropriation principle in response to Romer, right? And so while Romer can see why the rules of the game generate antagonistic class conflict, he actually can't really, his models can't regenerate the zero-sum dynamics of capitalism, essentially.
Yeah, because in order to introduce the notion, the third notion, the appropriation notion that Wright has here, you have to introduce the concept of time.
Exactly.
Because there has to be labor as a process in time, which is something that Romer's model cannot admit.
Well, I mean, like, let me see, like, in order to actually, in order to apply this principle to this economy, because it's this kind of thing, you don't necessarily need time. In order to have like anything like a realistic economy, you need time. Like in neoclassical economics,
the concept of labor effort is meaningless without reference to time.
Neoclassical economics,
you can call it
neoclassical economics is enemy territory,
and it would mean the same thing.
Nice, I get to see Mad Kyle. We got Mad Kyle disease.
Mad Kyle disease. No, listen, like I just think that like it's fine if some people are going to continue trying to understand Marxism in terms of neoclassical economics. I'm not going to convince those people out of it. And so I want them to get what's important about exploitation. And what I've eventually found, you know, in doing all the stuff about labor theory of value, and I don't know, like a lot of interesting studies that I'm glad I did, is just that it's the sociological notion that matters the most, not how you model it economically. So, you know, I feel a lot less like upset that a neoclassical economics example, while neoclassical economics is too abstract to represent the real world, you know, I don't mind that it's here, because there's a lot of people that you can't convince of the labor theory of value.
Well, furthermore, like this, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of seems like a reductio ad absurdism argument where, like, okay, let's assume the neoliberal bullshit, right? Like, Wright is taking this way more seriously than any of us are, because he's trying to make a point, I think. So let's just assume the stupid shit is for a second in this like model, right? In this mind game. And you still end up with class antagonism, even assuming time isn't real and not in a cool lefty woo way, but in like a weird neoclassical way, right? Time isn't real, and you have renters and workers. Let's just
call yourself a Star Trek fan. What would happen to all of the episodes if time wasn't real?
They'd be slightly better. So
Time zero.
So you assume this model, and you got renters and workers, right? Rentiers and workers, right? And then what ends up happening? You still have fucking class antagonism, right? Like, even assuming all the dumb shit is true, you still have class antagonism, which is a good thing for us, right? Like, even in their dumb models that fucking suck.
No. What we have to do is get mad about how he made the point. The point isn't the point, obviously. The point is that he used the right argument to get to the point. Like, I'm being a little facetious, of course, but like, we can, like, that's why this argument is here. Whether we, and like, and Vicky's right. Lost in the sauce. You mean professional sociology and economics? Yeah, that's the sauce. And for the last half century, this kind of extreme reductionist economics displaced Marxist economics and Keynesian economics as like the only scientific form of economics, borrowing a bunch of stuff from high math to essentially bully people into thinking this is the science. Like,
Keynes was also a neoclassical. Let's be honest.
Keynes is, yeah. I mean, I can't really weigh in on it. I don't know if he's using Walrasian equilibrium or whatever. Like, I don't know if it makes sense to talk about like
he was saving neoclassical economics from itself by bringing in points from the guy, the population guy. What's his name?
Malthus?
Malthus. Yes, Malthus. Yes.
Mouthfist.
Mouthfist.
I believe that's how it's pronounced.
We've been doing these reading series now. We've done this one. We've done the Brumaire. We've done the Revolutionary Strategy one. But we started with the TSSI, and like there was the whole idea of abstracting from time by setting your inputs into outputs. If price is the same,
yeah,
and we're back. We're back to the same.
There's a way in which the system, everything you try to say with neoclassical economics that has any normative content or bearing on the real world always seems to come down to talking out of two sides of your mouth. Because you can say, like, oh, in this scenario, the capitalists are pure rentiers. But by rentier, we don't mean they're actually deriving an income stream, because that would require that time existed. So instead, they're just rentiers. It's like you say the thing without saying the thing. That is absurd, and there's something that lends itself so much to making the kinds of ridiculous counterintuitive arguments that Sorenson makes here in that practice that I find deeply offensive. And that is, it's not the method itself. It's not how you get to the sociological point. It's that the foundation of the sociological point is deeply, deeply two-faced that annoys me so much. And yeah, I don't know what more to say about it than that. Like, it is inherently dishonest.
Well, I mean, the entire purpose of the project is basically to justify existing power relations. You have a normative statement that you want to make. You work backwards, figure out the starting conditions of the argument, and then roll that forwards to get to your normative statement.
I don't even know if that's like But it's the truth value of the statements that are like the most like egregious. Like the ideological stuff, I think is obvious, but like the fact that
it's not obvious. They teach this shit to first-year econ students without telling them all of the reasons why it's obvious.
Listen, I have taken those economics classes, and that's why I'm here. Basically, is because I was like, "What the fuck?" And you're right. It's not obvious to everybody. It's obvious to us.
Okay, but again, the point is here. I was one of those kids who went through those classes and did not think, "Oh, this is fucked. Oh, how does this make any sense at all?" I was the kid who was like, "Oh, interesting, counterintuitive. This was real science," and that's where my fury comes from, I think.
Well, no, that's a fair point. Like you've done graduate work in this field, and so you've had to deal with that kind of intellectual bullying from blustering people who pretend they're fake science is math, like when it's not. It's like just.
Funny, Kyle, I had the exact opposite. I did a course in mathematical economics in my degree, and like after about a week I was like, what type of horse shit is this? You know, I was so annoyed.
You math. I was just an econ.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, the only actual econ course I took was economics for engineering majors. And like the first day of class, the professor stands up and basically just goes, "Yeah, all of this is entirely bullshit. Just know it for long enough to put it on the test and then get on with your lives because this doesn't matter." It's like
I respect that man. I respect him.
The only econ class I took, I skipped over 100 because I was in like a bong rip qualitative research program and I wanted to do a little stats as a treat. So I took like a Boolean stats course that was in the economics department.
Boolean stats?
Yeah, like
Boolean.
Bayesian?
No,
Bayesian.
No,
0, 0, 1.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And
tell me about it.
I mean, I don't remember much, but it was a really weird cultural thing. And I couldn't tell if my professor hated me because I was queer or trans or I was in like a social justice and human rights program. Right. Or if he didn't hate me at all. But like, I definitely got like low key, what are you doing here, faggot kind of vibes from him. So.
Oh yeah.
It was a strange thing, but I did pretty good in the class. I kind of fucking winged my way to a B.
Yeah, the way that neo-reactionaries are able to turn neoclassical theory into like a social Darwinist theory of everything is, I think, perhaps its most, even more so than Romer's like shit that I think it's cool, but I'm a nerd. And I guess I don't know. I don't care about. I guess I'm trying to learn math so that I can read that stuff. And because one of the arguments that I always hear from fucking neoclassicals and kind of burrows in my head is, oh, you just don't understand. Like you just can't comprehend it because we're doing such high level science. And at the end of the day, what they're doing is
glittery horseshit.
Well, it's toy models. They're just toy models, and there's much more impressive work being done in the other sciences. And heterodox economics is a shit show too. I don't want to be too flattery about it, but there's all kinds of like much more sophisticated mathematics going on there. Like,
right,
there's a really interesting way that this field believes that it is creating like high math.
Yeah, and it's rubbish. If you want to talk about the type of maths that like should be used in economics is the stuff that Beer did with like the Jay Forrester's approach for like Checo in CyberSyn, dynamical systems, whether it's like fucking, like that's what econ should be made of. It's a dynamical system. That's how it should be modeled. All of the stuff that's in neoclassical economics should just be set on fire and put in the bin. There's literally nothing to be learned from it, and don't waste your life trying to argue with these twats who won't, when you see them you in your arguments are better than those, they won't take them on board because it's not about that.
No.
It's not about it. There's literally nothing to be learned. Only let somebody else critique it and learn the critiques. There's literally nothing to be learned from these guys.
So highly sophisticated
because
instrumental reason. I just have to say, it's highly sophisticated instrumental reason. You don't see proofs in most ideology.
Well, yeah, what I was
They're not
gonna
even
say,
proofs, though.
as a math major, as someone who's got a degree in it, like the dirty secret about math when you apply it to anything but itself is that you can make math say whatever the fuck you want. Like the real issue here is where it starts. The fundamental assumptions, the place where all of this is coming from is so batshit that it kind of doesn't matter what you do with the math on top of it. It's all going to come to something really, really fucking dumb.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask Kyle something to clarify. Do you take issue with Wright's, because you said something to the effect of like, what did you say? Something to the effect of like, you don't have a problem with the methods. You have a problem with the fact that the methods are so two-faced. So do you have a problem with Wright's eminent critique of this because the assumptions are so two-faced, or is it just Sorenson that makes you angry?
No, like, so I was trying to I was struggling to try to like articulate something intelligent there, and I think I do fundamentally have a problem with the method. I can't get around that, and I think that the problem is what I was saying about being two-faced is even when you are making a point like Wright's, if you're using the neoclassical framework consistently, you are being two-faced because you're saying things without actually saying them. Because like you're talking about rent without the notion of a rent stream over time, which is like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. And so I was just going to say that I feel like in this reading group, I'm going to be like Otto Neurath was back in the old Vienna Circle days, where whenever somebody would bring something up, he would just shout metaphysics. And everybody bullied him into replacing that with just shouting M instead of metaphysics because it would take less of their time. But yeah, I'll try to tone it down.
No, Kyle, keep the rage. Keep the fucking rage. Keep it.
Somebody has to be apoplectic on this show.
Oh,
I don't think it works.
It's a good point.
There's a big gap. There's a hole left in my heart.
Oh, please.
Let's do this slide.
Let me just say this though, that what we've been saying about time, and look, I'm adopting this for the sake of argument. I do fundamentally agree that abstracting from time does violence to economies, and there's a whole movement in called evolutionary economics, some of which has been absorbed into the mainstream, but you can't it would be hard for them to really incorporate dynamics into I think because of what I was saying,
you can have discrete time slices in neoclassical economics, but you cannot have continuous time in even like a way that admits like Zeno's paradox.
So fundamentally, like in a way, the coolest thing about calculus is missing. Exactly. So like it's really not some just left the axe to grind. You can just care about truth value, and if you like, let's say you're just missing the lobe that gives a shit about ideology, and you're only interested in truth value, you can have an axe to grind about this legitimately. It is a bizarre abstraction that not just Marxists with motivated secret theorists, like secret hopes about the labor theory of value, argue. It's just
and I think that the point where I find this to be most concerning about economics is that the conception of the economy is a conceptual system that has been used to destroy an enormous amount of life on Earth.
Right.
To justify it as something that we don't need to be concerned about, because there is the in group that belongs in the economy, and there's the out group that doesn't matter.
It's the ecology.
And,
it's always bracketed out.
The ecology, yeah, exactly. Whatever
Which often
is
enough includes other humans.
yes,
You know,
it's very much like nature in the sense of like also nature of like the people we don't like. They're too bestial to be human. And as long as we stick with a economic framework that does not admit the existence of time, I don't see how we get to some kind of like political ecology that transcends that in-group out-group distinction that is leading to like an ongoing mass extinction event. Because like how can you talk about nature without talking about one of the most fundamental constructs of the physical world? Like, how do you get to materialism? I believe like a true materialism is one that acknowledges
Material.
Time and space. Time and space.
In a material world, and there is nothing ideologically more suited to denying that humans exist in a material world than neoclassical economics and its denial of space and time as things that
Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, part of it all is that we can thank our Lord and Savior Karl Marx for for getting us off the, vulgar ground of Epicurean materialism that, takes vulgar interests in the nature of the world. And we know that what materialism really means is social, right? Which is kind of something about old school political economy that does legitimately reflect on Marx's notion of materialism. Which is maybe like, so Marx's materialism is cool, but
you have to do a roundabout maneuver to re-include nature in the social in order for the project to be useful in any way, right?
Yeah.
Talking about our Lord and Savior, have a look at the email I just got a second ago. Can you see this?
Not
really.
Whoa!
Oh, hey!
Lingo.
Up in the world, Tom.
Oh, hell yeah! Woo!
And then it goes on.
I didn't
and
know
it
you knew
says,
Chuchi on Duolingo.
And then it goes,
Jesus is German?
Jesus is Lord is following you.
Oh my God!
There you go.
I guess he already knows Hebrew.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, so I guess to circle back to the text, though.
Let's do that.
So to circle back to the text, though, I just want to completely understand where you're coming from because I'm a bimbo and I gotta ask questions to understand.
I think actually you're Einstein.
Yeah. So isn't it if you assume neoclassical for the point of imminent critique and it shows its face or it shows its ass as two-faced and foolish, isn't that a good thing?
So there's the way in which you can arrange a toy model like Esri described in order to show a contradiction with what neoclassicals make as like normative claims. Or even as sort of quote unquote scientific claims, which are like sort of semi-normative. They have the normative value of being scientific. And that's kind of like what Romer was trying to do, right? Was to like, do the imminent critique. But the problem with doing the imminent critique is you still have to accept as valid the fundamental assumptions of the model for it to be imminent. Right. And that's where I'm taking issue with.
Yeah, no, but I think what you're saying about imminent critique makes sense because I think what you're supposed to do in imminent critique, and this is what makes Marx such a, God bless him, but a poor role model in this respect, is imminent critique is for the purpose of drawing out a contradiction is supposed to demolish the framework in which you're working in. Marx is ironically the figure that people most use to reintroduce classical political economy into discussion. The framework he at first was, I think, trying to demolish, but he later got more scientific aspirations.
Yes, and I just personally believe that there are not the tools in an imminent critique of neoclassical economics to perform that demolishing work, because you're starting with no space and time, and that's a big problem.
And but if I hear you clearly, because of an initial split between economics and ecology, perhaps one could say that an imminent critique of economics by itself can't.
Yes, it's
what we need. Economics, period, as a field, because we still have to buy into the split somehow.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So
I can agree with that, because
you can use the master's tools, but sometimes the master's tools are just like a suicide booth, and that's what are you going to do with that, right?
Well, I guess the reason why I kept asking this is I'm walking away from this imminent critique being like, this shit sucks. Like, fuck neoclassical. It's not like I'm walking away with this being like, well, space and time doesn't really matter. I'm walking away from this being like, this is some of the biggest horseshit I've ever seen. So that's why I kept asking. But I think I do understand that, in no way is assuming neoclassical economics going to deal with fucking climate change or issues of the appropriation of Native American lands. It just can't.
It can't, and it can't deal with things like, the ways that finance can exploit people over time, because you can't, you can't really learn anything about finance from the system that's super useful, because in the system, the payoff schedule is perfectly predictable. So that doesn't really tell us anything about the antagonism between lender and debtor.
And
it's
finance people,
weird.
Whatever, and finance people have thermodynamic models, which apparently also suck, as it turns out. But whatever.
What are you talking about? This sounds dank. I could just borrow money and it's gonna be fine no matter what. Sign me the fuck up.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, I mean, if we just defined our way, all the problems with lending money, it would be great.
Yeah, where's that bank? Sign me up for the neoclassical banks to give me a loan. Let's fucking
excuse
do
me.
this.
I need to speak to your bank manager. I have a proof here that demonstrates this economy that I've
Excuse me, time is not real, so I am technically not late.
Yeah, this is the economics version of the film Pi, I believe.
Are you calling my information imperfect? Fuck you. Okay, let's get back on track. Can we get back on track to this slide?
Yeah.
No track. Only
no
time.
track. Only trek. Okay, who wants to do this one? Kyle, you're after talking so much. Let's Sophia.
I'm done talking. I'm gonna go get some water. I'll be back.
Yeah.
All right, my turn. Make it big.
Big.
Don't take that out of context.
Class,
exploitation, and perfect competition and information. What about the third criterion, the appropriation principle? Do capitalists appropriate the labor effort of workers in a capitalist system with perfect competition and information? In such a system, in equilibrium, workers who expend more effort would be paid more, workers who shirked would be paid less, and according to standard marginalist reason, the amount they were paid for their effort would exactly reflect the price of the product they produced with that effort. The standard reasoning of neoclassical economics to deny the existence of exploitation in capitalism. Even under the above conditions, the following is true. 1. The only labor performed is by workers. 2. Capitalists appropriate that product and thus appropriate the fruits of labor effort of workers. 3. For any given wage level, capitalists have an interest in getting workers to expend more labor effort than workers would spontaneously want to expend. 4. If workers owned their means of production, capitalists would find it difficult to get workers to work as hard for a given level of wages. In a purely competitive capitalist economy, therefore, antagonistic interests over the expenditure and appropriation of labor effort continue to exist. Therefore, rents do not capture all the aspects of exploitation.
Who could have thunk?
I mean, this is a good book to give to baby econ students. Be like, read this, my poor child.
Yeah. Read just like literally 10 pages and come back to me. Yeah. Just we've talked about it, but like, you know, it is just, you know, I find personally, because I haven't read the actual neoclassical econ, but when you read these arguments, they are so nonsensical, like, and so riddled with holes that I feel like my brain isn't structured right to receive these arguments. Like, I cannot understand in what kind of way you could look at the structure that had been set up here for this, where you have workers and not workers, and try to make out that they're like, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm saying. It's just like, basically, yeah, the last sentence is all we need to get from this, is that rents do not capture all the aspects of exploitation. Okay.
Well, this is why right libertarians are so into weed. They have to just like fucking smoke fat dubs, like huge fat dubs on a daily basis in order to get this to absorb into the brain and stick.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think that's any excuse. Someone who smokes fat dubs on a regular basis, I still think you have intellectual and moral autonomy from these.
To be clear, I'm not saying dubs necessarily is necessary and sufficient. It's just necessary.
Are we saying marijuana is reactionary? Is this what we've come to?
Yes, I am straight edge Sophie Maoist, and if you smoke dubs and have sex and do anything fun, you're a counter-revolutionary.
And that's it. Join in the White Army.
I'm going to...
it's over with.
Wait. Oh, I think I made a misstep.
Okay, right. I'm going to take on this next section. Employment rents. In Sorenson's analysis, the employment rents workers receive because of transaction costs in the employment relation counts as a form of exploitation, rendering the workers an exploiting class. That's right. The workers are exploiting. Here, Wright argues that in general, employment rents constitute one of the way workers are able to mitigate their own exploitation. Now, this is like this part of the book really, really annoyed me, I must say, because one of the best things about for me, like for reading so far in the book, the way Wright talks, is that he brings this kind of analytical philosophical approach to trying to very precisely define terms and stuff like this. Yet here we have him like taking on board even the concept of an employment rent. I mean, this is outrageous as a Marxist that he could even use that term without it being like in sarcastic, that he can actually like the input, like, so like it is like you should never use a term like employment rent. Like, it's not a rent. You know what I mean? As a Marxist, it just infuriates me how like he takes on board this neoclassical term and doesn't critique it, and he just talks and takes it as a given. It just drives me absolutely mental for someone who's being very precise to then switch into this kind of imprecision. For me, is just I kind of find it outrageous.
To be clear, you're objecting to him taking on the definition of rents, right? Like,
of employment rents.
Employment rents, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and he doesn't like he doesn't critique it as far as I can remember, but he takes it. He deals with that as a type of a phenomenon in capitalism. Okay, I'm going to continue. Like, if I take that back, if I'm wrong, but that yesterday or whenever I reread it, the same thing hit me again. Okay, first point: where imperfect information exists, capitalists are generally prepared to pay employment rents to workers in order to extract labor effort from them. This has been elaborated by Bowles and Gintis and Akerlof and Yellen, who is the current Fed chair. Because of imperfect information in the labor market and process, capitalists are forced to spend resources on enforcing the labor contract through supervision, monitoring, etc., in order to detect shirking. 3, catching workers shirking is only useful for capitalists if workers care about being punished, especially about losing their jobs. The threat of being fired increases as the cost of job losses to workers increases. Paying workers an employment rent, a wage above their reservation wage, increase the cost of job loss and thus the potency of employer threats. So, if I got a job now and the work, normally I would only get paid £8 an hour for it, again paid £10 an hour for it. Well, I care more about getting fired then, so I will not shirk as much, and it'll be a cost to me if I have to go into the job market again to get an £8 an hour wage. So yeah, whatever. Next, the cost to employers of extracting labor effort thus consists of 2 components: the cost of catching working shirking, monitoring costs, and 2, the cost of making job loss hurt. That's an unemployment rent. The employment rent is thus a wage premium that workers are able to get because of their ability to resist capitalist attempts at extracting labor effort. In conditions of perfect, i.e. free to acquire information, the capitalist capacity to appropriate effort is enhanced since workers lose this ability to resist. Rather than seeing employment rents as a form of exploitation by workers, it is more appropriate to see such rents as the outcome of resistance to exploitation by workers. Right, so he nearly gets there, but he still uses the term employment rents, and I just find that just gross. Yeah.
Well, isn't he just outlining Sorenson's argument here? That's kind of how I took it.
Like, I think he's trying to provide an alternate, like, pro-labor, like, account of employment rents and who's doing the exploiting.
Okay.
Like,
this is later on. Yeah.
And so this is, it kind of unfolds from his definition of exploitation when taking the neoclassical model into account.
The definition of exploitation is different from Sorenson. Therefore, he's making a very slightly different point to him. Yes.
Say that. Can you say that?
Yeah. Like you. Okay. So, like Wright's definition of exploitation is slightly different from Sorenson's, right? So,
Right.
When Sorenson says that actually exploitation is good, Wright is saying the same thing, but from a very slightly different assumption at the beginning that gives it a little bit more pro-worker flavor. Yeah.
Well, I don't think Wright is putting the moral spin that it's good per se, but he's taking on the definition of employment rents, but changing his definition of exploitation.
Yeah, because Wright doesn't think that like unemployed workers are exploited by solidarity wages.
Yes, this only applies to the case in Sorenson. The similarity is the case in Sorenson where workers who are making above the reservation wage are exploiters. They agree that there is a rent collected in both of those cases, but they disagree about other things.
Right. And to answer a question from the chat, how does this constitute a rent? I believe that rent in this section and in this framework is basically just anything, any amount of value that you can get from some kind of asset above and beyond the value that you would get from it in a situation of perfect competition.
So I guess I don't know. Like, I don't take as much issue because this is to me this is just a thought experiment, right? Like, let's assume Sorenson's bullshit, and you still end up with class antagonism. I don't really see
like
the problem there.
seeing,
Like,
he should be.
I don't know. I think like I think this explanation for employment rents isn't. This doesn't squick me out as much, and the neoclassical framework of rents, I think, is one of these like real abstraction things that mirrors something that happened in the economy, where once like the concept of rent, is from what I understand, is all tied up in land. You know, that's what all the old school political economy is about.
It's about
renting
positionality.
land.
It's about positionality. Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
you have a position that allows you to get an economic advantage, and
Right.
there's sort of a mental leap that's taken from land rent to like having a social position that allows you to get an economic advantage.
having an
Right.
asset
Right.
specifically,
But-
like having the means of production that you rent, basically.
Okay.
Not necessarily
so-
means of production,
but-
like a house
but
as
we're
well.
talk-
Remember,
but
It's-
we're
Right.
We're
Employment
actually-
rents.
We're talking. So at first, rent is like landed property in political economy. From what I understand, intellectual property rents are one of the earlier abstractions from this concept of renting a literal place to renting like, oh, I invented this idea and this is my idea, or this is my like thing, and if you use it or play it in a certain context or whatever, because I'm renting this place of abstract space, like I get a cut, right? So there's already it's like in the process of capitalism quite early on, an abstraction into the abstract plane with rents. And so the way that I see the neoclassical expansion of the term rents to cover all kinds of differentials is mirrored in the way that capitalism actually does expand markets that are kind of like that. Sometimes people call it neo-feudalism or techno-feudalism or whatever, or content markets, and like more things resemble intellectual property markets, resemble rentier markets. So I don't think just returning to a purely classical definition of rents is going to help us understand the 21st century economy, because there's been a real like procession of abstraction that's happened over the course of time in capitalism. And we do want a more like maybe precise definition of rents, but I like this argument that Wright makes at the end, I don't take to be totally an imminent critique. I do think
Well, he circles around at the end of the chapter and says, well, but so basically, in conclusion, Sorenson's whole thing about rent is silly, and this is a whole different kind of relationship. It's wage exploitation.
Right, but the concept of economic, so yeah, but let me see.
Yeah, I don't know where it is in the chapter, but he does say that. So it's not like he's
no, he's not. Yeah, he's not endorsing this concept of exploitation, but I think he would agree with Sorenson, and this was making Tom upset, right? That this is the employment rent exists.
Yeah,
and,
I get
and
that
you can think of
impression.
that as a rent. Like,
Yeah.
and there are ways that workers are divided in the economy by wage differentials, like, and sometimes people think of those things as rents. And when you think about trade and labor and between the first and third world, let's say, like, there's distributional differentials, and sometimes people call those things rents. There's like a number of like usages this way that I don't know. I don't find that as intrinsically objectionable. Like,
I don't know how I feel about that, but
He is saying that the possession of labor power by a worker allows them to become a rentier. Because
why am I getting a math degree? Right? Is because I kind of want skill rents above what I can make now.
That's not a rent.
No, it doesn't have any necessary relationship to accreditation. It's the employment
No, not
rent.
necessarily.
the employment rent is any kind of positional advantage. But yes, if you were to reduce it down to the question of labor power, then yeah, like it would be skilled labor would give you a rent that you could collect.
Well, it's not rent. Like it's not a rent. Like you get.
I don't think that it's necessary that I don't think this necessitates an anti-labor perspective or an anti-communist or anti-Marxist or anti-worker perspective.
But let's get it straight, right? Marx breaks down the economy into two different types of skilled and simple labor, right? So skilled labor produces value at a higher rate. Okay, so if you are skilled labor, according to Marx, right, you will be getting, the fact you're getting a higher wage is because you're creating more value, depending on, obviously depending on what your role is, whether it's value creating or not. So like you're not getting a rent, you're getting exploited still, but you're creating more value. The idea that is a rent is just, it's like the use of a wrong concept. Like, so if a worker is able to extract more like money here that he calls in like some kind of an employment rent, what that means is that in that relationship that the worker has more power and he's got more labor power, his value of his commodity is higher. There's no rent involved here. Now, if you were working as a skilled laborer, say for a company, and you're getting above the value of which you're producing, at that point you can call it a rent, I think. But you can't call it before that, okay? And like skilled labor are not generally, maybe in the exception they can get a rent, but in general they're getting exploited, but they're creating more value.
Yep, agreed.
Yes, certainly by like labor theory of value standards.
Correct. And like, what I find frustrating here is that I feel reading this now, maybe Wright will say somewhere else in another book, but I get the impression that he thinks employment rents, the way that we're talking about them here, is a reasonable, is a scientific, accurate description of that phenomenon. And as a Marxist, like I just don't know, like that's just like if you're going that way, I don't know how you can critique somebody from getting rid of exploitation, because you're basically just calling differences in labor, in power relations between people, rents, and that is not a rent, And I just find that offensive that a Marxist could call that an employment rent and take it on its terms. There is a
version of labor theory of value that doesn't accept the idea of like a multiplier effect for skilled labor, and in that one, sometimes people use rents to describe the difference.
Fair enough, but like the theories of everything,
What was that, Kyle?
Yes, it would necessarily follow if you didn't accept that skilled labor is more value productive, then you would have to conceptualize it as a rent. There's no other way to really think about it.
Well, why couldn't you, like, why can't you, with the sloppy fucking stuff that we're dealing with here today, why couldn't you conceptualize it as an exploitation? That's the fucking shit that's going on here. We're mistaking exploitation
that's way worse.
Rent and exploitation.
It's way worse. And that's why this chapter is interesting. Is because however aberrant you find Wright's position.
So okay, here's my thing. I don't know dick from shit, right? Like, I don't know whether I fully buy on to the labor theory of value or not. Everyone could take their crack at trying to convert me to the religion. I'm down. But my vibe check with this, right, is that I think rents, just knowing what little I know, I think rents make a lot of sense to describe intellectual property, definitely land. I don't know if I necessarily agree that skilled labor is like you're renting out the assets of your education for rent. If that's the implied thing that's here or not.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about like what Wright is saying a little bit more directly, we could just read the last, the concluding paragraph of the chapter, in which he states, Oh.
Good idea.
Yeah.
No. Let's keep speculating.
Here, I think it might be there in this slide here. Have a look for the listeners. 1 second here. Let me just check to see if it is. I think I wrote out most of it.
I mean, I have it pulled
Read
up
it.
in the book
Yeah.
here.
Read it. Let me get it. Yeah, okay. What page is it on?
92.
Don't know. I'm looking at the ebook version. I don't have page numbers, but it's literally the last paragraph of the chapter.
Okay, here we go. Let me just get it up on the screen here for people so they can read it if they want. Go on then. Yep.
So, in some cases, rent might still be try this again. In some cases, rents might still be directly a form of exploitation. The rents that a landowner charges a tenant farmer constitute a direct appropriation of the labor value of the farmer, for example. In other cases, rent acquisition is better thought of as a way of mitigating exploitation. It is for this reason that, in general, I have argued that employees who are the recipients of various forms of rents within their earnings should be regarded as occupying a, quote, privileged appropriation locations within exploitation relations, unquote. The concept of economic rent, therefore, can play a useful role in the theory of class and exploitation by clarifying the range of mechanisms by which exploitation is enhanced or counteracted, but not by reducing the concept of exploitation simply to advantages obtained by asset owners under conditions of imperfect competition and imperfect information.
Right. So he completely buys into the idea of employment rents as a
Exactly.
As a concept.
Yes.
Yeah, it's offensive as a Marxist how you could fucking come to that conclusion. You can have problems with the labor theory of value. Say, Wright is coming out of that thing. The problems that like the TSSI I think deals with conclusively. And I can take so you want to redesign your labor theory, or you want to redesign the theory of exploitation, blah blah blah, but he still takes on board this offensive for a Marxist description, which he doesn't have to take on board the idea of somebody being able to get a little bit better pay, exploit a little bit less as actually getting a rent. That seems to me to be a complete what's the word?
Contradiction in terms or something.
Not contradiction in terms, but like a concession to neoclassical. It's like he takes on all the concepts from neoclassical economics to call that thing a rent for me.
But Tom, there is an issue, I think, which is that in Capital, Marx says that the determination of the wage rate is something based on social conflict, right? Like it's based on the conflict of the workers and the capitalists. This is
power relation,
It's a power relation.
Labor power for a reason.
So when we describe that wage rate going up or down, what is the precise term that we can use to describe the stakes of that antagonism?
It's the value of the labor power. That's what it is. It's the value of the labor power. And
does Kleiman accept the? Sorry, I was just putting together some old debate that Andrew Kleiman was talking about. Does the TSSI accept the multiplier effect? Because I remember him arguing for a form of homogeneous labor.
No, he does. Yeah, completely.
All right, it's been a while.
He thinks that Marx, I have asked him explicitly in an interview only a couple of years ago about that.
All I know is that because I'm part of, if I were to join an industrial union for healthcare, I'd basically be going into the hospital, karate chopping a nurse, and stealing her purse.
Hell yeah, babe.
Well, and I think the only way that I could see this being as making any kind of sense is if you're talking about licensure, for example. If you get if you're an architectural drafter, you don't actually tend to make that much because you are tied to your ability to work is by and large tied to your ability to put a stamp on your drawings that are accepted by the state. So if you don't have that, you essentially need to be working for someone who does, and that person is going to be taking a cut of your essentially the money that you're making for the business, right? That's how businesses operate. If you have your own license, if you can actually stamp documents yourself, even if you are working for someone else, what you get paid increases significantly, right? So in that kind of instance, is the ability to is that licensed ability to stamp a legal document therefore an asset that can be charged rent upon above and beyond what you would normally get?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah, it would alter the distribution of returns to labor through rents. Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm not. I'd have to I'd have to check. I'd have to think about that one to be honest.
I think
accreditation. I'm not exactly sure about accreditation, Kyle, because are you just changing the amount of exploitation that you're undergone by your accreditation?
Yeah, but the point of accreditation is it's like a form of social closure, making the labor pool smaller.
Yes.
Like that's like the whole fucking point. Like I don't. There's some problems with the way that what you might call labor aristocracy, or even like the sort of nationalist focus that classical labor movements had, that would create these dynamics that look, I'm a pluralist. It doesn't, I know that people aren't all going to have the same frameworks, and so you can describe these dynamics in a way using like these like extended concepts of rents. Maybe once the dust is settled, I'll feel much more strongly about this, and I'll want a nice ortho way of understanding rents. But where I'm at now, and I think in general for analysis, we can make our case, but it's one thing to say that like one analysis is like superior than the other, and I guess it's another thing to say that like the concessions of these premises of rent, constitutes a fundamental betrayal of the working class. Let's say, like.
Oh yeah,
I think
I don't know if I feel like it's offensive. Like I feel like maybe it might be wrong, but
yes, but why is it like the thing is look like why do all the errors go one way? Right? Why do the interpretations all line stack up in one way? That's the problem. It's not like if somebody has an imperfection. It's like that that Wright's taking upon board the idea that they are employment rents to me, that somebody has a better bargaining position to reduce their amount of exploitation is a rent, says something to me fundamental about his politics. And I would also say that in the case you're talking about, Victoria, I think that wouldn't be a rent. I think that's a position where you've increased your power in relation to your bargaining power, so you're getting exploited at a lesser rate. Like if you're still not getting the full value of your labor, you've just increased your labor power, the value of your labor power in that market.
Well, I mean, but that's ridiculous, Tom. Like you can't say that like even in Marx,
because you're being exploited.
He refers to the antagonism between the guild masters and the journeymen, right? Like this is a social antagonism that's real. It's not just about their position versus the capitalist.
What do you mean? Like what with respect to what I've just said, like I don't see what you're talking.
Well, okay, so say you're a apprentice, right? And you're not accredited, and you are just as good at drafting as you're just productive at drafting as the master you're working under, who is accredited. and the master is getting the big cut and you're getting the table scraps, there's a social antagonism there, and it's not unreasonable.
Yeah, like the master might be exploiting you. Yeah, in that case, absolutely. But I'm just talking about. I don't know. I obviously didn't hear exactly the like. I wasn't sure whether like the master is like the master's like in that case where you have a master and he's getting a part of all the labor from all the people. You know, he can be exploiting them. Damn straight. Yeah, I'm not making the case that he's not. I'm talking about, like, say, for example, if I'm working in a place and if the fact that I have an accreditation allows me to get paid a higher amount, like that accreditation is not a rent. It's changing my own personal position with respect to getting that thing. I'm not using that on someone else. You know, that's
okay. This is just the thought I've had, Tom. I'll put it out there.
Yeah.
When I was trying to describe the antagonism between the workers and the capitalists over the wage rate, right?
Right.
And you said that is about the value, right? It's about the value, how much value is given to one side or the other. Like, I don't think that's wrong, but that is, when you speak about value, it's like a kind of like absolute concept. But when you think about the relative gain versus loss, you need some kind of relative concept of like, how far am I up? How far am I down?
Yeah,
and
the rate of exploitation, the rate of surplus value.
So it's about, I don't know. I guess when we speak about a rate or a value, these seem like objective things that do not reflect the subjective struggle that is involved in that conflict, right? In terms of like I don't know, us versus them, like the fight, the war, that kind of thing. It feels like it doesn't come in when we talk about a rate or a value.
No, like it explicitly kind of does to me. Is like it's labor power. It's the power of labor. Yeah, it's the power of the laborer versus the capitalist in that social relation that determines the value of the labor power. Okay, it doesn't determine the value of his output. Yeah, it determines the value of his labor power. You know, so
I see. I don't think that's the way that Marx meant it. So
it is. I think it's in
the physics sense of power, not in the sense of social power.
No. I don't think so. No, because it's variable. The labor power is variable. Yeah, it's a power dynamic. It's the race. It's like, what is the bargaining position of the laborer versus the capitalist? How much can he reduce his rate of exploitation or not within that relationship?
No, Marx is pretty explicit in talking about labor power as the ability to expend labor over time.
The value of his
that's what labor power is.
The value of the labor power. So you're correct. No, you're both definitely correct. I'm totally wrong. I'm going to edit all this.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. The value.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know why I just went. I had total brain fade. I don't know where I was getting that. Right. Totally scratch everything I said in the last.
No. It is. I mean, there's a physiological. No. Stop beating yourself up. There's a physiological dimension to labor power that, like, if you're a value form theorist, no, there isn't. But in Marx, there kind of is, and.
The sweat of the worker's brow, etc.
No, it's the value of labor power. Is that I was thinking?
It gets congealed into the dead social forms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. That's the whole point of that process. Is to link the physical exertion of effort, and labor power in a sense of calories or whatever, and then labor power in the social sense.
Specifically human calories, right?
Yeah, specifically human calories.
It's calories as a part of a human organism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's and that gets socially absorbed.
Right. Yeah. Fucking embarrassing. I can't believe I went off on that one. That's mad.
It's not. It's not that bad because the main value that Marx. I'm sorry. Like, no, I'm not.
No, beat yourself up more, Tom. Whip yourself on air.
Come on.
Let me turn on my camera.
No, please. No, But the point is like what Marx's emphasis on social emergent value like makes what you were saying kind of plausible, and the value form theorists argue something like that.
Anyway, let's keep going. Sorry, I I can't believe I said all that stuff. I don't know. It's getting late. It's half 8. Thanks, Kyle, for making me actually back down, and Vicky. Back down on that. So it's not done. So I can edit the fucking thing out and not put it out. That's brilliant.
We're doing social construction of truth here.
Fuck me. Yeah, good. Who wants to take this? Vicky, will you take this last slide, or this second last slide? We've kind of half discussed the next bit, but this slide here.
Yeah, I'll save you from yourself, Tom.
Please.
Okay. So what about skilled workers? So Wright claims that it is certainly the case that in conditions of solidarity wages, the wages of skilled workers are, at least statically, lower than they would be in the absence of union-generated reductions of wage differentials. And he gives two reasons.
Let me just check what that statically, because this is I would have written in the thing. 1 second. Where is this? What page would this be on? I don't know what that statically. Can you read that again and just leave out that at least statically? Because I don't know what the fuck. Did I put that in? I think I might have put that in by accident.
Sure thing. Okay, rolling back up to the top. Wright claims that it is certainly the case that in conditions of solidarity wages, the wages of skilled workers are lower than they would be in the absence of union-generated reductions of wage differentials. He gives two reasons why the unskilled do not exploit the skilled in this context. Solidarity wages enhance overall class solidarity and thus shifts the balance in favor of the workers. In the long run, this advantages the material interests of skilled and unskilled workers. And two, in the absence of solidarity wages, skilled workers would receive union-generated rents. Then what the unskilled workers... here it is. Then what the solidarity wage really does is simply reduce the rents acquired by skilled workers and redistribute them to the unskilled workers. Even if you regard rents per se as a form of exploitation, this does not constitute a form of exploitation of skilled workers by the unskilled, but of the economic agents who pay the rents to the skilled workers in the first place. If we see solidarity wages as a redistribution of rents from the skilled to the unskilled, perhaps the unskilled are exploiting the capitalists, since after all the capitalists are paying the wages and thus the rents. But capitalists, under the definition of exploitation being used here, are themselves exploiters of workers by virtue of appropriating the fruits of labor of the workers. Parenthetically, I don't know that this argument makes sense.
You can just.
Yeah, that's Tom editorializing.
Yeah, that's me editorializing. Just leave that out.
Okay.
I'll defend. I see your challenge, Tom.
Yeah. Okay. Just go on to the end bit, and then let Ezri in.
The rent component of solidarity wages should therefore in general be thought of as a mitigation of capitalist exploitation rather than a form of exploitation in its own right.
Right, and much of Tom's, I think understandably so, much of Tom's attitude towards calling something like this a rent is because of the association of, rent as a form of exploitation. So in the same way that exploitation and non-exploitative economic oppression can have this moralized discourse around it, we can have a moralized discourse around rents, that is informed by this kind of feeling that rents are always tantamount to exploitation. But this is explicitly not Wright's view. So like, he sees this form of rent as a mitigation of the exploitation of worker by capitalists. That essential labor appropriation principle, I think, defends him from a lot of nonsense that could otherwise come about by assuming these principles.
Right, but he takes them on their own terms. Like that's my problem. He takes their concept of like an employment rent and runs with it. He thinks, oh, employment rents are good, and I object to that concept.
Convince me that this is a worse analysis. Because I don't care if he takes them on their own terms or not. Like, what better explains the reality? I think I kind of disagree with this, honestly, but I don't have this knee-jerk kind of hatred that I feel from other people. Like, does it explain the real world well or not is really what I care about at the end of the day.
But I think the terms matter. Like, it matters whether that it is in a rent or whether it's just literally the worker has got more power and they're able to not be exploited. Like, so you end up with language where you start describing like workers as having like doing the same shit as capitalists are doing in a relationship where they're goddamn being exploited. You know,
That's explicitly not what Wright is saying.
No.
So again, the terms matter if one term better explains the real world or not. So I don't feel like you really answered my question.
No, what do you mean? Like Wright is calling these employment rents. Right.
Yes. He is calling it employment rents, but he's not saying that they're doing the same thing that the capitalists are doing. They're mitigating.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, but I mean he's calling them employment rents. That's my point. And so he's even why he says it's not the same.
So what?
He's bringing in this term.
Absolutely. He's not drawing an equivalence with capitalists. He's drawing an equivalence with rentiers of like landlords and shit, right? Like that's it. But he's saying capitalists are doing a separate thing when they're exploiting workers.
Yeah, and I would say further, I agree with you, Esri. It is an analytical decision, but also it's more than just that. To me, it's a political decision.
Well, no, I said this is an analytical objection. Like,
yes, I mean,
which
objection.
is fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yes, but I think it's more like I'm having an analytic objection, but I'm also having a political objection.
But
yeah, it's both.
I guess but like, so your problem with it is simply that it conflates what workers and landlords.
Correct.
Is that the essence of your objection?
Yes, absolutely.
But I mean, look,
as if the worker in a position who's been exploited is actually somehow exploiting the capitalist.
But that's not what that's. Well, no, he does say that actually.
Say what?
Well, he does say that you, if anything, you can think of unskilled workers as exploiting the capitalists.
I don't think he actually does say that specifically.
I gotta find it, but
yeah,
he says something like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably because he wouldn't co-sign that someone that's not appropriating labor effort is an exploiter.
Right? Yeah, I think what he's saying is that, like, even if you take on that rent is necessarily exploitative, then if you're going to call what the unskilled worker is getting above and beyond what they quote unquote should be getting, then you can't really call that an exploitation of the skilled worker. It's more an exploitation of the capitalist, of the person who owns the assets. And therefore, like, if you're exploiting the exploiter, in a sense, that kind of cancels out. Like, that's kind of the argument that I'm reading here.
But you're not exploiting them.
Saying that the greater evil here is exploitation, what the capitalists do. And if you subscribe to that, like, extreme, like, all rents are exploitative view, then yeah, the rents that the unskilled workers are taking may exist, but they're taking them within the context of a larger exploitation, a larger injustice, right?
No.
Let me just read it real quick. I found it. Let me just read it real quick.
No, let me just say one thing in response to Kyle there. Like, you are taking neoclassical economics on board if you are taking the position that the worker, if they're able to get a higher wage than what is like in whatever that reference, whatever market rate or whatever that's implied under perfect conditions or whatever, that anything above that is a rent. Like we're taking neoclassical definitions of what are rents on board if we're going to say that.
Yeah. No, I object
to that. I object to that fucking fundamentally.
No. I know. I was just trying to describe what his argument was.
Yeah, Kyle's endorsing this. Let's just read this. Let's just read this. If solidarity wages are viewed simply as redistribution of rents from skilled to the unskilled, perhaps the unskilled are exploiting the capitalists, since, after all, capitalists are paying the wages and thus the rents. But capitalists, under definition of exploitation being used here, are themselves exploiters of workers by virtue of appropriating the fruits of labor of workers. So what I'm reading that as, and again, I'm not necessarily endorsing that, but what I'm reading that as is that this is sort of a form of counter-exploitation to exploit the exploiters, right? And they're not exploiting maybe to the same extent that they're being exploited, but it's a way to get a little bit more. Right? Yes. Now, here's my thing, right? I give two rats' asses whether these concepts come from neoclassical or wherever they come from. What I want to know is, like, does this explain things better? And what I'm hearing a lot of objections to is it just comes from neoclassical, so therefore it's bad. And for me, and again, I already kind of don't necessarily agree with all of this, but for me, I'm going to need something a little bit better than neoclassical bad. Like, you don't need to convince me of that.
That's not what I'm like, God almighty. Like, when a worker is in relation to a capitalist and they work for a wage for them, the rate of exploitation, varies within that. Okay, now the fact that a worker can reduce the amount of exploitation is not, they're not exploiting the capitalist. They're reducing the rate of their own exploitation, right? There's not a rent going on there. There's a reduction in their exploitation due to the value of their labor power is higher. Okay, and like to somehow bring the language in and and confuse the relations of production and confuse the analysis to call that a rent is just look. If you don't understand my point, I can't convince you anymore because
no. The first half of your point actually does get at what I was hoping to get from you. Is like, give me something that explains this better. That's all I'm asking, right? Like, and I think, based on my limited understanding, I think you did that. So thank you. It's this, It's everything after the first half of just like I don't know if I necessarily agree that it confuses the thing here, the relationship here. I just want something that explains what happens to me when I'm at fucking work.
Yeah, maybe we can put it this way: is that theoretically speaking, in order to look at wage differentials, I guess there's two kinds of ways to look at those things as rents. One of them doesn't have a labor theory of value. The other kind of does have a labor theory of value. It's just that it doesn't accept that skilled labor has some kind of multiplier effect. In order to conceive of like these different, differentiated sectors of the working class without rents, you need a labor theory of value. Or at least it's sufficient to have. It's not necessary, but I can't think of an alternative. You need a labor theory of value with that multiplier effect reading of skilled labor. So, that's one version of the labor theory of value. But I think every other theory, if I'm not mistaken, and I think Kyle, Tom, you'd probably be able to check me better on this. You know, maybe there's some like heterodox theories or historical theories that are alternatives, but most people conceive of these differentials as rents. Outside of that specific reading of labor theory of value with the multiplier effect on skilled labor.
Well, like that's the standard.
Just to make sure that I'm keeping up with the conversation here, and you know, just to make sure that the audience is too, because Sophie's horning in on my position as the dumb bimbo in this podcast, and I don't like it.
You've both been on Twitter. That's so cute.
I've been on Twitter less.
Mm-hmm.
Less of
okay.
you.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
I think like what's happening here is that what Wright is saying with his argument of this kind of like counter exploitation is kind of paralleled by what you're saying in the way in which having a higher skill or being in a union, whatever, these are forms of taking away some of the value that the capitalist is capturing as a form of exploitation, right?
Right.
And what Wright is saying here is that even if you consider it a form of exploitation, because it is not exceeding the exploitation that the capitalists are doing in the first place, and almost definitionally can't, then like that doesn't really matter. But I think what your point is, Tom, is that even calling it exploitation and saying it doesn't matter kind of misses the point, because you're using a definition of exploitation and sort of like granting it legitimacy over an area in which you fundamentally disagree that it should be at. Like, it's not necessarily like the consequences of like the direct consequences of his argument that you're opposing here. It is the application of a term and of a definition that is kind of like fundamentally broken in a way. Like, am I getting all this correct?
Yeah, I think so. Like he's using the wrong, like you're using the term of a rent here, when to me, like it's not a rent. It's fundamentally not a rent. It's a power relation within exploitation relations.
Yeah, okay. Well, I will add one thing here, and then I think I gotta get going. Okay, so if you want to take this rentier perspective, there is in the background the neoclassical notion of perfect competition and the returns that implies to labor, right? Like as a yardstick that you use to measure, like, is someone renting or not, or is someone getting rents or not? But if you're coming at this from like Marx's point of view as like sort of this weirdo heterodox classical political economy guy, you don't have that notion of perfect competition. And so there is no such yardstick. Like, these are floating values in a turbulent system. They're not things that you measure above or below a certain line that is defined as perfect competition. And so if you don't have that yardstick, that line of perfect competition, then why bother calling this a rent?
Right.
I guess my follow-up question is, so it seems like Wright takes on this concept of rent and just, modifies it with his definition of exploitation, right? But does he take seriously the concept of perfect competition, or is that just assumed for the sake of this argument?
It's assumed for the sake of the argument, and it's also a thing that is really, it's like,
it's so baked into these neoclassical
admitting the legitimacy of it as a thing that could even potentially exist sort of colors your argument inherently, because you conceive of this like baseline existing where the other side wouldn't even admit that it exists. So that's I wouldn't say he's like, you know, die hard rah perfect competition guy, but he's still falling into the same problem that all heterodox economists who use a neoclassical baseline do, which is admitting that this is like a sort of normative model that exists in the world that we can usefully speak about.
I think because of his, you know, training as a sociologist, I think elsewhere in the book we might have noted it earlier on. He mentions, you know, the sort of obvious sociological distance between assumptions like perfect competition, and in this chapter he's like, yeah, perfect information. I mean, come on, like, like, so
I guess
I wonder really, like, because
like, I don't think his heart is in that stuff.
I think he no, his heart isn't. There was a point in which he was more like full-throated in support of Romer's economics, but over time, like the whole reason for his sociological definition of exploitation is because of his dissatisfaction with Romer's economic neoclassical economics version of exploitation. So
I commend his definitions of exploitation. I think they're very good, right? But I think there is absolutely no need for him in this chapter, right? For him to term what we're talking about here, what I would consider you know, positions of power in determining the value of the labor power for the worker, to term them as a rent. Like, he could literally could have said, neoclassicals call these a rent. This is obviously not rent because the exploitation relationship is different than that. But and then it continued in that way. But he takes he takes, on some level, he's taking their arguments and their language as read, which I think is very, very objectionable to me, because it confuses the relationship between the worker and the capitalist. The fact that a worker can ever really exploit like a capitalist is like, you know, maybe in the extreme case it could possibly happen in an extreme case, but like not the way that we're talking about here, what they're actually talking of.
So I guess my follow-up question then is like, is there a way to take the way that Wright uses employee rents and try to like model that or think about it not in the context of perfect competition, and does that map onto reality? Does that explain social? Is that a good theory for explaining social relations?
Well, like, that's what he's doing here essentially, because he doesn't believe in perfect information or perfect competition or anything.
But he doesn't really draw that out in like a non-perfect competition because he's giving a critique of Sorenson, so that's kind of in the background.
You don't actually need to use perfect competition as a quantitative baseline, because it's something that inherently cannot exist and cannot be measured. It's just a conceptual framework that he's working in. It's not like you can get a number out of the idea of perfect competition. It's just kind of assumed that, like, oh yeah, like, if we just let the market play out, like, you know, somehow we would have this idea of like, well, this is what everybody would get.
No, I get that, but what I'm saying,
yeah,
what I'm saying is that in this chapter, where all this idea is introduced, those assumptions are still there, and so
yes, because he calls it a rent, and he could call it something else, and then use the same quantitative model, and it would be the same quantitative model.
But no, that's not what I'm saying, because he doesn't really take the perfect competition thing seriously. So what I'm saying is that
they all say that.
Let me finish. So what I'm saying is that if he doesn't take the perfect competition thing seriously, but he does take the employee rent thing seriously, then we need to think about does that make sense in conditions of not perfect competition.
Right, or does it make sense for him to actually take it on board as a term?
No, I don't care about that. I'm caring about the thing I'm saying.
Well, I maybe I want to like bring this, like cycle this around towards like the practical implications of this. Personally, I think because one of the biggest political problems with labor and socialism, unions, workers' politics in the 20th century was the ways that labor could be segmented from its, universal interests. Like, how do you go from like the, great humanist, like, Marxist horizons, the bong rip, universal, like class perspective transforming into universal human perspective? How do you get from that to workers of the world unite for a white South Africa? Like, how does one get transformed into the other? Is by all of these like ways of segmenting the proletariat. So I was like, I don't know if this is my research program, but devil's advocate argument, right? Let's say that calling that an employment rent is like, fundamentally working class, like this, horrific bourgeois ideology. But that like, you could use this concept to describe so much of the labor segmentation that ends up dividing the international proletariat's class interests up, so that we end up with nationalist class compacts, we end up with guild trade unions, we end up with, like cop union shit. Like we end up with all of the dead ends of like 20th and not to mention a lot of these theorists adopt these versions of rent theory and even, versions of rents as exploitation theory to understand what the fuck was happening in the USSR. And like, so I think that even if you have a starting point that is tainted and weird, you can make like practical hay out of it in a way that isn't reactionary.
Right. All I'm saying is like, let's test it. Like let's set aside the fucking it's neoclassical. Like, if he's wrong, he's wrong. It shouldn't matter. And so I want to see. I want to think about this, not neoclassical using the wrong terms, and it obscures the relation. Like,
why not call it a profit?
Doesn't explain anything.
Why don't we just call it a profit then? Why don't we call it an employment profit? Right? Because that's not the question being posed here.
Well,
no, it's exactly. Why not call it employment profit? Right? It would make no fucking sense to call it employment profit. No more than it does to call it employment rent. It's fucking dumb, right? And if the people are using it as a term, it's just all fucked up.
I don't even know if I agree with this, but
I'm going to call it an employment profit from now on. I'm going to call it employment.
Knock yourself out.
I'm going to call it that worker there. He's earning profit there by working for the capitalist who's making profit off him.
If Eric Olin Wright wasn't already dead, I would kind of like be concerned that Tom might go to Madison, Wisconsin, and hunt his ass down.
Yeah, I am. Seriously.
Tom's gonna go full Uncle Ted on Eric Olin Wright.
Oh, yeah, no way. No, I'm not gonna bitch out and fucking send him something in the post. I'm going to do it face to face.
Yeah, again, it's gonna be hard.
Give him a little kiss.
It's going to be hard, all things considered. RIP.
Yeah. No, but I think that if you do not need to call this concept a rent. That's fucking fundamental to me. You can call it something else, but don't call it a rent or a profit. Call it something else. Call it their position of power or whatever. Because it matters. Because it makes out that it buys into this fucking logic of workers, of denying the overall relationship that's inherent in there. that somehow like, oh, it's 27% capitalist exploitation, 15% fucking workers exploiting capitalists. Like, give me a fucking break. Seriously.
It's, you know, it's not necessarily like exploitation in this framework. A rent isn't necessarily exploitation.
Well, okay. Look, I'm going to be real with you, Tom. I'm pushing on this not because I agree with Wright. My instincts are, you know, I don't know if I did. I don't think so. But honestly, the real reason why I'm pushing on this is because you kind of have a partisanship in these economic debates towards like a very specific theory, and I don't know if I agree with that either. Right? And you just being like, no, you can't use that term doesn't convince me.
No, but like, you know, like you can say, right, I'm making the case. I'm putting forward the case that it's not a rent. You know what I mean? You know, I'm you know, that's just my personal opinion. I think it's fucking very. I just think it's totally incorrect way to go about describing what's going on in that.
I want to be able to describe the relationship, the kind of thing, whether it's we call it rent or pee poo poo. I want to be able to understand what happened in the 20th century with, you know, what's often called labor aristocracy, or the difference between first world and third world workers.
But you don't need this term to do that.
Why?
You don't need it.
Why?
Oh,
well, I mean, there's more than one. There's just more. So, you know, pluralist intuitions versus not pluralist intuitions. Even if I did develop a strong partisanship, I don't know if I would be able to muster the same level of anger about it. But like, you know, I think we could go on about this. Are we done with the chapter? Have we gotten through?
We are done with the chapter.
Yeah, I think we're done.
All right.
Oh my god, this chapter.
We did it. We did it. So we finished part 1 of the book. Is that what happened? Is that it?
That's 1 through 4, and then we're on to Michael Mann's 2 framework of analysis. I think we've already done part 1, haven't we? Yeah. No, then this is the last part of 1. The next one is the last one.
Okay, yeah, you're right. I'm totally
wrong. Sorry, I'm getting angry. I'm getting angry because I find it very objectionable, and I'm not able to explain it to you. I don't know, you know. So fair enough. Like, we don't all have to agree, you know. But I'm just like giving my 2 cents.
Well, I'm just like, please convince me. Like, I don't know enough about this, so I want you to sell me on your idea.
Yeah, like. You know, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial from a Marxist fucking economics point of view. I think I'm just saying the plain, simple orthodoxy. You know, that's, you know, and I'm giving out from a point of a Marxist point of view of how the understanding economy is, like that. I object to a fellow Marxist, apparently calls himself a Marxist, using a neoclassical concept without even objecting to the name of it and taking it on board. And we've already like talked about the other parts in the chapter so far about how like they have excised certain elements of elements of what we would think is good about Marx. And here's another example. And and I think all of this is symptomatic of, you know, obviously I haven't even finished the book, but it's symptomatic to me of what I know of his politics and where he ended up from Esri. And all of this is symptomatic, and it just irritates the shit out of me.
Well, here's two things to remember about me. 1, I'm a bimbo. 2, I'm slightly black-pilled. Like, I fuck Marxism. I don't care. Like, fuck anarchism. Like, you gotta make me believe, man. If you want me to believe in the orthodox, make me believe. Like, convince me.
Believe the heterodox orthodox. Believe the heterodox orthodox. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because I was gonna say like the true, like in good Marxist practice, like the true like orthodox tradition in institutions did incorporate a bunch of like neoclassical distortions of Marxist truth. You know, like so that's the reason I don't blame Eric Owen Wright, and I've explained this before, is that this was a sociologist who did defend the labor theory of value in the paradigm available in public as it was like falling apart, and then just sort of like got convinced out. And, you know, maybe he should have been, you know, reading the right books by the time he's like practicing in the 2000s. Or, you know, he was practicing much before that, but like, you know, he was around for decades. It's like I think he was like head of the American Sociologist Association. There's a lot of reasons to be suspicious of Wright. Like, you know, like he's he's like a preeminent like sociologist.
Right.
But
like, there's bits in the book though I think are really good. Look, so it's not, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
I feel
this particular chapter was hell. The last one was pretty interesting.
Yeah, the last one was really good. I like, so, you know, it's just, yeah, no, it's, you know, I think there is real, like, I think there is, it's extremely important just from a science, like, let's leave like Marx and all that bullshit out of it, right? But it's extremely important as a science, like from a scientific point of view, to describe and the relations, say, if you're, no matter what you're doing in science, to get them then the concepts right and to not confuse the concepts, you know, and like that, this stuff, like of calling that a rent, it just like irritates the scientist in me, that it muddles what the actual relationship is. And I find that just like scientifically really offensive. You know what I mean?
I guess I'm just a tad bit more empiricist than you, because I want to see, like, you know, maybe that concept is flawed to begin with or not, but like, does it actually explain anything in the real world? That's all I'm asking for. Like,
but like you can get explanations from like neoclassical economics for stuff in the real world, right? And you know that you can, not everything it says is wrong, right? But that doesn't mean that, like, you know, we should take on board their concepts, you know.
If neoclassical, like,
I don't think they explain much well.
If it did explain the real world well, I mean, yeah, maybe we should take on its concepts. But I mean, fortunately, that's conditional. That's not met. Like, we don't have to worry about that hypothetical reality.
Yeah, I don't really think they might. You know, a broke clock gets time right twice a day. Like, I think that's about all they're really good for. So that's why I don't take it seriously. Not because I don't know, just not because I'm a Marxist or because they're neoclassical, but because it just doesn't work.
Right, now we've killed Kyle. Okay, we've bored him to death with my terminological diatribes. Let's bring this offline. We finish the slides and we can have a chat offline and let all these poor stragglers who still are here on the call have some fucking peace. We'll say thanks to everybody who turned up. We got Fugot, John Watson, Imagination Scene, Donald Diazzi, Alex Marquez. We got Mason and Erica. Who else? Fido remains. A bit too close to pedo for me. Paleo Joe.
Fido, it's the Socratic dialogue, yeah.
And steel-toed communist. Okay. We'll go offline and then we can keep this argument going. I'm bored of the argument already. Let's be honest.
No, I'm burnt out. That was the show.
That's the show,
over, folks.
Do it. We gotta say bye, everybody. Already, 1, 2, 3.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.